Oddly, the poor flute player sat by the river, a place where he found comfort. He had just been laughed at during the village music festival, his melodies falling flat and his flute failing to catch anyone's attention. The mocking laughter of the villagers echoed in his mind, and even the wind seemed to make fun of him. With his head low, he thought of giving it all up and becoming a woodcarver like the other men, someone who would finally earn some respect. In anger, he raised his flute high and threw it into the stream with all his might. "Take it, river, take it all," he shouted, hoping the water would carry away his last bit of hope. But to his surprise, the water twirled, and the flute was tossed back onto the shore. Odili stared, confused and startled. The flute lay there, waiting for him to try again. "Is someone playing tricks on me?" Odili yelled, but the river only whispered back with the sound of the wind. Without thinking, he picked up the flute and threw it back into the water, only to see the same thing happen. The flute returned to him, untouched by the current. "Sing, oh great musician, sing!" A beautiful female voice urged. His curiosity grew. Handshaking, Odili raised the flute to his lips, unsure of what he expected to happen. He blew gently, and to his amusement, a soft, beautiful voice seemed to join him, singing along with his tune. The voice was sweet and strange, coming from the river itself. The birds stopped singing, and the water became still, as if everything was listening to the melody. Odili played more, and the river's voice joined him in perfect harmony. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the voice stopped. Odili searched all around him, jumping into the river, but there was no sign of home or what have sung with him. "Come back, oh mysterious one, tell me your name," Odili cried into the silent air, but no one answered. He sat by the river, waiting for a sign, but none came. As the sun began to set and the villagers came to fetch water, Odili stood up and hurried back to the village. He reached the center of the village, flute in hand, and began to play the haunting melody from the river. The villagers stopped in their tracks, drawn to the music that flowed from Odili's flute. The sound was so beautiful, so full of life that they couldn't help but listen. More and more people gathered, enchanted by the tune that seemed to speak to their hearts. When Odili finished, the crowd was silent. They looked at him in wonder, amazed by how the once ridiculed flute player had become a master in the blink of an eye. Odili was surprised, as he had never been appreciated all his life of playing flute, and he decided to look for the voice behind the melody. The next few days were filled with silence, and Odili found himself at the river day after day, trying to attract the voice again. He tossed his flute into the water, hoping for another miracle. After several days of trying with no response, the flute finally returned to him. But this time, the voice that had once sung alongside his melody spoke with a new tone. "Make a wish," the voice whispered, soft and clear. Odili's mind raced. What could he ask for? Wealth? More fame? A new song that would never grow old? But as the seconds passed, doubt crept in. So instead of wealth, Odili made a wish that would grant him more than just fleeting fame. "I wish for you to marry me," he said. "If I marry you, I will have everything I desire." In that moment, the entity behind the voice emerged, a mermaid unlike anything Odili had ever imagined. Her brown gold hair shimmered like sunlight on water, cascading down her back in perfect waves. Her light green eyes sparkled with an unworldly brilliance, captivating him with their hypnotic beauty. Odili could hardly breathe, his heart pounding as he stood frozen in shock. "I am Avia," she said, her voice as soothing as the river's gentle current. "The mermaid of this river. I have watched you come here day after day, pouring your heart out, lamenting the cruelty of life. I have felt your pain. I will marry you, Odili, but only under two conditions. You must never take another wife, and you must never reveal my true nature to anyone." Odili, mesmerized by her beauty and the promise of a life beyond his wildest dreams, agreed without hesitation. His thoughts raced with visions of the wealth, fame, and respect he believed were finally within his grasp. Nothing else mattered, not the conditions, not the mysteries of her origin. But as Avia stepped onto the river bank and transformed into a human, The magic that had captured Odili flattered. He gasped in shock. His gaze fixed on the left side of her face. A deep, ugly scar tainted her otherwise flawless features, a cruel reminder of the price she had to pay to be with him. What is this? Odili stammered, recoiling in disgust. Avia's eyes softened with a mix of sorrow and understanding. This is the price of becoming human, she said gently. To be with you. I gave up my true form. The river marked me with this scar as a reminder of my sacrifice. For a moment, Odili was silent, his mind warring between disappointment and an overwhelming wave of guilt. Here stood a creature who had given up her beauty and freedom for him. A poor, frustrated flute player with nothing to offer but his dreams. The depth of her sacrifice stirred something deep within him. Moved by her devotion, Odili swallowed his initial shock and reached for her hands. Avia, he said, his voice thick with emotion, your sacrifice means more to me than anything. I would honor you as my wife, not for your beauty, but for the gifts you have given me. Together, we will build the life I have always dreamed of. With that, Odili took Avia as his wife, vowing to cherish her despite the scar that marked her face. As they walked into the village, hand in hand, the villagers stared at them in shock. Odili, the poor flute player, had now become the husband of the scariest looking woman they had ever seen. As time passed, Odili's name echoed throughout every corner of the village. He had become the best flute player the village had ever seen. His talent was sought after by kings and dignitaries alike. Those who had once turned their backs on him rallied around him to share from his success. But as the applause grew louder, Odili's heart, once filled with gratitude and humility, now darkened with greed and pride. The scar on Avia's face, once a symbol of her love and sacrifice, now filled him with shame and discomfort. Whenever he walked into festivals or grand party with her by his side, the whispers of the villagers sliced through the air. How could such a handsome and wealthy man settle for a woman like her? They would mutter slowly. Her appearance, once appreciated by him, became a stain on the perfect life he had built. Blinded by his pride, Odili began to distance himself from Avia. He surrounded himself with several mistresses and concubines, indulging in affairs and promiscuity. Avia's songs, which had once captivated him, now felt like background noise to his growing ambition. He began to crave something more, something he believed Avia could no longer provide. It wasn't long before Odili set his sights on a young woman from a respected and influential family. She was everything he thought he needed. Beautiful, refined, and a symbol of status. Despite Avia's quiet pleas and the unspoken sorrow in her eyes, Odili married the new wife in a grand ceremony that the entire village attended. Ignoring his promise to Avia, he paraded his new bride, basking in the envy of others, while Avia faded into the shadows of his life. Odili's new wife, proud and sharp-tongued, quickly settled into her new life, and the two of them began to show Avia nothing but cruelty. They mocked her, ridiculing her scar, the very scar that had made Odili's rise possible. The new wife would sneer at Avia, shaking her head in disgust. Look at her, a freak of nature. What kind of man would want something like that? Pointing at the scar on Avia's face, she would laugh cruelly. Something certainly left his curse on you. My husband must have been feeling very generous to settle for such a monstrosity as his bride. And with a loud hiss, she would shake her head and walk away, leaving Avia to silently endure the sting of her words. Avia's heart breaking, would retreat into the shadows, unable to speak out against the cruelty. Odili, the man she had once trusted, joined in with his new wife's mocking laughter. He would turn away when she tried to speak to him, brushing off her gentle pleas as though they were nothing more than the wind rustling through the trees. Avia, in her sorrow, began to withdraw from the world. The pain in her heart grew, and the scar on her face, once a symbol of her sacrifice, now seemed to deepen with every insult and mocking word from Odili and his new wife. The sun had set on a warm evening, casting his golden rays over the village as Odili, drunk palm wine, sat with his new wife by their grand home. The sounds of their laughter filled the air as usual, but tonight the alcohol clouded his judgment and loosened his tongue. I thought you said you loved me, that I was the only one want for you. Then why? Why won't you send that ugly witch away? Odile's new wife spat, her voice sharp with anger. As she turned her back on him, Odile leaned back with a drunken laughter, his face twisted in a sneer. The ugly witch. You mean Avia? He said mockingly. How can I ever love such a disgusting fish woman like her? A creature from the river. If I could, I would chase her away this very instant. Who would want someone like her when I have you, my beautiful wife? He clinked his cup against hers, laughing, completely unaware of the weight his words carried. His wife stared back at him in shock, her mouth open. She could not believe what she had just heard. Could it be true? Was Avia really a creature from the sea? The story she had heard as a child suddenly came rushing back to her. The whispers of the mystical beings, powerful but cursed. Or was this just the drunken rumbles of her husband? Or was there truth in his words? My husband, she said cautiously, her voice trembling with curiosity. What do you mean by fish woman? Are you saying that Avia, that she's a creature of the sea? Yes, my love. Odile waved her off carelessly, taking another sip of his palm wine. She's just a common mami water, nothing more. The new wife's shock melted into delight as she realized the cruelty of what he had just confessed. She leaned closer, a slight smile coiling her lips. Swear to me, Odile, swear you don't love her. Drunk and filled with pride, grinned foolishly. I swear it, I don't love her. She means nothing to me. You, my darling, are all that matters. From the shadows of her heart, Avia had heard everything. Every cruel word that had spilled from Odile's lips felt like a dagger to her heart. This was the man she had sacrificed everything for. The man who had vowed to love her for eternity. Now, he had completely turned his back on her. The very next day, Odile left the village to perform for kings and important people across the land. His new wife, feeling victorious and proud, stayed behind, ready to take charge of the household. She found Avia in the kitchen, quietly cooking by the fire. Her voice was sharp and cruel as she clapped her hands and began to insult Avia. How can you be so shameless as to stay with a man who despises you? He told me just last night that he doesn't love you. If he had his way, he would throw you out like the trash that you are. Avia, ever calm and gentle, ignored the words and kept stirring her pots. This only made the new wife angrier. She marched over to the fire, grabbed Avia's pot of soup and threw it to the ground. The hot soup spilled everywhere as she stood with her arms crossed, waiting for Avia to retaliate. But Avia didn't. She quietly bent down, picked up the pot, and began cleaning up the mess. Fight me, you reject of the gods, the new wife spat, pushing Avia with her shoulder as she walked by. Avia still said nothing, her silence infuriating the woman even more. The new wife, consumed by rage, decided to take things further. She stormed into her own hut and grabbed a clay bowl filled with rotten fish water she had fermented overnight. The smell was so terrible, it could make anyone gag. With the bowl in hand, she stormed towards Avia's hut. Go back to the river where you come from, she screamed as she flung the stinking fish water at Avia. The foul liquid splashed across Avia's face and clothes, the sharp, sore stench clinging to her skin. The humiliation was unbearable. Avia stood frozen in place, her heart shattered. The woman Odile had chosen over her had done the unthinkable, treating her like she was nothing. Slowly, with trembling hands, Avia wiped the foul-smelling water from her face. She didn't cry and she didn't speak. The pain in her heart said it all. This was the last straw. She had endured too much insults, humiliation, and betrayal from the man she had loved and given everything to. Without a word, Avia stepped out of the hut. Her movements were slow but steady, like someone who had made up her mind. She didn't look back at the village. She walked towards the river, the place where she had once belonged. The night had fallen, casting a thick blanket of darkness over the village. Odile returned home from his trip, his body tired from entertaining dignitaries and playing for kings. His new wife greeted him at the door with a forced smile, but there was something unsettling about her behavior, something off. The usual warmth he felt from the house, the familiar sounds of Avia's soft steps and sweet hums were gone. Avia, He called out, his voice laced with irritation. She had always greeted him no matter what, but tonight, the silence that greeted him was deafening. Ignoring the silence, Odili made his way to bed. The next morning, Odili woke up to find the same unsettling silence. He made his way to Avia's hut. The hut was empty. He asked his new wife about her whereabouts, but she only ignored him. Panic gripped his chest as he rushed from one corner of the compound to another, calling out her name. Avia! Avia, come out right now. His voice cracked, but no answer came. His heart pounded in his chest and his mind raced with possibilities. Finally, in a moment of frustration, Odili turned to his new wife for answers. Where is she? What happened to Avia? With a cold smile, she looked at him, her eyes gleaming with a satisfaction he didn't understand. I did what you wanted. I helped you chase her away. You made it clear you never wanted her. I just helped her leave like you asked. The words hit Odili like a bolt of lightning. You did what? Before he could comprehend the weight of his betrayal, a loud bang came at the door. 2 palace guards entered, their faces grim, their hands holding firm weapons. Odili's heart skipped a beat, and the dread in his chest began to swell. Something was wrong. We have the mandate to search your home. One of the guards said sternly, his voice heavy with authority. Why? For what? Odili's confusion deepened, but there was no time for questions. The guards pushed past him, their heavy feet tugging against the wooden floor as they tore through his belongings. Stop this madness! Odili shouted, his heart raced with panic, his hands trembling as they tore through his music bags, his personal belongings, everything he had carried for years, each piece of his life now under scrutiny. And then the unthinkable happened. There, buried beneath his flute, lay the king's precious chains and rings, stolen jewelries that had been reported missing for days. Odili's breath caught in his throat, his mind struggling to piece together the impossible. How had they ended up in his bag? I didn't steal anything, he pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. I swear, I didn't take them. This is a mistake. But the guards were unmoved. Enough. One of them barked. You are a thief, Odili. We will let the king decide your fate. Odili was dragged through the village, humiliated and bound in front of all who had adored him. The whispers of the villagers cut deep into his heart, their eyes now filled with contempt instead of admiration. The once great flute player, beloved by all, was now nothing more than a common thief in their eyes. Odili was brought before the king in his palace, surrounded by leaders who watched with disappointment. You have stolen from me, Odili. The king's voice rang out, cold and unforgiving. You were once a celebrated man, but now you are nothing more than a thief in my eyes. Tears burned in Odili's eyes as the guards stripped him of his dignity, branding him with the mark of a criminal. His once glorious music, the very thing that had brought him to greatness, had now become his downfall. The crowd around him murmured, their disdain clear, and in that moment, Odili knew he had lost everything. After the disgraceful ordeal, Odili's life took a sharp turn. No longer was he the man who played for kings, the man who dazzled crowds with enchanting melodies. He was cast out, forgotten, a stranger in his own village. His new wife too turned her back on him. Disgusted by his fall from grace, she left him without a second thought, her heart no longer interested in his failure. And so, as the days passed, Odili became a shadow of his former self. The great flute player, who had once been adored by all, was now nothing more than a village drunkard, consumed by the loss of his fortune and the abandonment of Avia, the woman who had once blessed him with the voice of the river. Every day without fail, he would approach the water's edge, holding one of his carved flutes, his hands trembling as he gripped the wood. In silent remorse, he would toss the flute into the flowing water, watching it sink into the depths, expecting to hear Avia's gentle voice, but all he heard was the sound of the sinking flute. Even as time passed and his body grew weak from the lack of food and heavy drinking, Odili returned to the village, still carrying flutes carved with the name Avia, boldly hitched upon them. He hoped foolishly that the river would return the flutes he was throwing in, that Avia might answer his calls, forgive him, and perhaps return to him once again. But to his great disappointment, none of his flutes ever came back. The river, once a source of his joy, now seemed cold and indifferent to his pain. The villagers, who had once whispered in admiration about all the least skills, began to speak of him in hushed tones. They saw him at the river's edge each day, his frail hands lifting flute after flute. The sight of him, hopeless and broken, was a reminder of the price of his betrayal. In his final days, all the least health failed, but his routine didn't change. One morning, after a night of heavy drinking, he walked into the river, flute in hand. The current carried him away, and when his body was found, he lay, clutching the last flute he had carved. The villagers, now understanding the depth of his regret, spoke of his tragic end. They said the river had never returned a single one of his flutes, just as Avia had never returned to him. Yet, if you dared to swim deep enough in the river, if you dared venture beyond the usual paths, you might see them. Old worn-out flutes, their once smooth surfaces, now scarred by the passage of time. Each flute, sinking into the muddy depths, still bears the bold inscription Avia, the name of the woman he had once loved and betrayed, the silent remnant of a haunting reminder of the man who lost everything and sought for forgiveness too late.